On episode 358 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, I answer listener questions. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/358. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hello, and thank you for being a part of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. I am so glad you're here today. This is going to be a special episode because today is the official third birthday for the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. Yes, I launched the podcast on December 6th, 2015, and this episode that you're hearing today is going live December 6th, 2018. And how has so much changed in just 3 years. It's really quite amazing. I'm going to talk about the podcast. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new book. And then I'm going to talk about going forward, what I want to do with the podcast, with my career, with the whole thing. If you're not interested in all that and all you want to do is get to the Q&A, you might want to skip forward a little bit because this is going to get into the origin of the show, the things I've been doing for the past 3 years, the growth and where we are today. If you're not interested in those types of things, then I'd encourage you to skip towards the end and you can pick up the Q&A. We got some really cool, good questions there that I know you're going to get some value out of. So this is not an entirely show about me and the podcast. It's about you and how I can help you reach your health and fitness goals. So let's go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, the podcast started 3 years ago. And when I first started the podcast, I did a lot of things to try to jumpstart it and get it going early. And I spent a lot of what I would call stupid money, building up some things that didn't matter. I spent money on things that didn't matter. I bought equipment that I'd never actually ever used. It was really kind of a traffic wreck. Now, I had a full-time job, so I had the disposable income to kind of do those types of things. But if I'm looking back at myself now, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, email me, let me know. Let me give you a little bit of advice because you don't have to spend a ton of money to have a podcast. You do need to spend some money to have a good podcast, but you can get a decent podcast with not much of an investment if you're willing to invest your time. So, I started the podcast because I had done some things for my health and well-being that I felt were quite valuable, and a lot of people were asking me about it. They could physically see the change in me. I was a different person, and they recognized that. And so more and more people were reaching out to me that I knew, and I just got to thinking, I can't just not tell everybody. If this is something that's going to work for me and it's starting to work for other people, let's just prove the case. So when I launched the podcast, I was extremely ambitious. Again, I did have a full-time job, a very stressful full-time job at that. And as I reached out, I decided I was going to do the podcast 5 days a week. I was going to have shorter episodes of 15 minutes, enough time that you could go for a nice little walk and it wouldn't take away too much of your day, to spend 15 minutes 5 days a week doing some moving around. That would basically put us at about 75 minutes, which is the minimum requirement of what the federal government says you should do. It's by far a very low bar, but I thought, hey, this is doable for most people that I want to reach out to. So I did that for quite some time. I think we got all the way up into the 70s for the episodes. So a good long time, probably 8-9 weeks of, or longer. I mean, I guess we're looking at closer to 12, 13, 14 weeks that I ran this podcast for that amount of time. It was a lot of work, and particularly when I was trying to do interviews and keep the interviews under the 15-minute mark, a real processing challenge for my head, for my stress. And I was like, okay, this is a little too much. And so I made the bonus announcement that I was moving to 3 days a week, and I was going to give myself some slack on the length of the show. If it needed to be a little bit longer, it'd be a little bit longer. If it could be a little bit shorter, I would make it a little bit shorter. And that worked pretty well. But I found more and more I wanted to reach out to experts in the field. I wanted to do more interview shows because I really felt like I could read a book and really pull out some huge gems for folks, some great tactics, in many cases, some good strategies to help us stay on track with our health and fitness. So I started reaching out to the guys out in there that were writing books and experts and whatnot. And I got some awesome guests on the show. There's been some huge ones from like Dr. Fung, Jimmy Moore, Dr. Friedman, just Dr. Greger, just tons and tons of really, really good guys and ladies. Sorry, I missed a few of those. But, had some really great shows. And but I found, working a full-time job again and going through some pretty stressful events, that having to read 3 books per week, and a solo show actually probably takes me longer to prepare than an actual reading a book show. And I know that sounds weird, but I spend a lot more time than the 6 or 7 hours it takes me to read a book to actually plan one of these shows when I do a solo show. I spend a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of time doing some research to make sure that what I'm giving you is right. So I prefer the interview style as a way of getting the information out there. And so I just found that doing 3 interview shows per week was just a little too tough on me. So I tapped it back down a little bit more to once a week. And as you'll know, if you've been listening for the last couple months, I throw in bonus episodes every once in a while. So it's not like I'm just doing 52 episodes a year. I probably do closer to the realm of 60 a year, which is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's a good bit of content, but it's not so much. Getting a lot of good feedback from that. So where have we come? Where are we now? Because when I first started, I was happy to see that first download, and it was me. The second download came, and it was someone else, maybe even you, if you've been with me from the beginning, and that was pretty exciting. Well, now things are a lot bigger. I just released, or this is actually being released, as episode 358. Which means there's a ton of back catalogs. And in fact, unless you're subscribed to the podcast on iTunes, you don't even see the first episode because they only show the last 300 episodes on your player when you go to look for the podcast, unless you're subscribed, and then you can go all the way back. I've had over 205 guests on the show. In fact, I think I interviewed 206 today as I'm recording this. So a lot of great folks have come on this show and provided great content, and I'm going to continue to strive week in and week out to get the best possible guests on the show that I can. There's some really cool, great guests coming up. I can't tell you their names because they might miss their call, and I don't want to say they were here and then they're not. So I'm not going to give you any false promises there, but I've got some really great episodes coming up that I know you're going to enjoy. We've had over 1.3 million downloads and listens to the podcast over the 3 years. That's phenomenal to me. I mean, it's just an unbelievable number that we could have over 1 million people have been exposed to the 40 Plus Fitness podcast and are a part of our family. And I think that's just really, really cool. Now, I know some of you listen to every episode, but when you realize 358 episodes and 1.3 million downloads and listens, that's pretty significant. What we're able to touch and what we're able to do here. So really, really happy with that. We've been listened to in over 149 countries. And I can tell you most of the countries where we haven't been heard are the countries that you would expect me not to be heard. It's the STAN countries over in the Middle East and a few others in Africa and down in South America. But for the most part, this podcast is listened to around the world. So it's gotten some really good guests from around the world, but it's also gotten some wonderful listeners that are getting this content there. So I really appreciate you tuning in each and every week to be a part of this show because it is a community. If we're going to get healthy, we're going to do this together. So I'm really, really happy to have both my North American-based listeners and also my international listeners. Thank you so much. Now, I'm often featured, the podcast is often featured on the top 100 in the health and fitness and in the alternative health space, which is really, really good. I'm looking at the numbers that they throw out for podcast listens and all of that. We are right in the mix to be a top tier podcast. We're right in the top 10%. Top 15% most weeks. So we're right in that bailiwick of getting the good. And because we're niche, I mean, we're over 40. So I'm not trying to be everything to everybody. So I don't expect to be the major player here, but we are doing really, really good in the charts. The Facebook group continues to be a slow grow, but it's a good, solid group. I love the feedback I get from you there. There's currently 571 members. Now that can go up and down over time. If you're not a member of the Facebook group, you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group. I make a lot of announcements there. We interact there. You can ask questions there. I'm on the page. I go onto that group every single day to check in and see what's going on with folks. So really, really delightful community, and I'm really glad for the folks that are a part of that. And then the Facebook page is just shy of 13,000 likes. We're at 12,990. So if you haven't liked the Facebook page, go look up 40 Plus Fitness, find the Facebook page, and go ahead and give us a like. They don't show those posts, so it's not like I'm going to inundate you on your feed, but it's just nice to know that there's a lot of fans out there that are interested in what we're doing, and that's just another way to see it. And then, of course, the reviews on iTunes. We have basically 159 reviews. We got a few more ratings. Some people rated and then didn't leave a review, but there's over 100. There's 159 reviews on the podcast with an average rating of 4.96, which is phenomenal. A couple people don't like certain parts of the show, and I get that. I may say something that offends a person here or there, and I understand that. My goal is to get information out and let you disseminate how that information fits in your life. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a dietitian. I'm a personal trainer with some personal experience, and I've interviewed over 205 guests at this point. And so I think I know a thing or two to at least guide you in your own education of things that are there for you. So if I'm not making someone happy, please go ahead and leave me a rating and review. It helps me. I've had some comments on the podcast page, and I've had some reviews that have made me step up my game. One was for sound quality. So I've changed the way I record the podcast so that I can have better sound quality. I've had someone who was upset that I had too many ads at the beginning of an episode. And so I went ahead and moved those to the back of the episode. So he doesn't have to listen to them. He can stop listening as soon as they play that last music bumper. He's good to go. So I do listen and read your reviews, and I do make adjustments, and will continue to do so. So if you haven't left a review for the show, please do it on whatever you're listening to this podcast right now. I think you can do it and still be listening to me. So it doesn't cost you any time. Just go ahead and leave a rating and review. It really does help me make the podcast better. So now, I just finished the whirlwind effort of publishing a book, and I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the origin of the book. The book came about because I was laid off, and I was laid off last December, and I was going through a lot of things, and I was thinking, the podcast has done a lot for a lot of people, but there's a whole segment of folks out there that aren't going to find the podcast, but I know they're listening to books on audiobook, and I know they're reading books. So I want to try to hit more people. I want to try to touch more people. And being laid off, I had the time. I'm like, I've got the time to invest in getting this out there, getting this message out there. So I sat down and I kind of outlined what I thought the book would be about. And if you listen to episodes 295 through 299, I call it the Wellness Roadmap. That's actually the outline that became the book. I actually outlined it for you here on the podcast, and that now became the staple, the basis for the writing of the book. And I had that format when I went forward. And I hired people across the board. So I had editors, copy editors, layout people, the whole bit to help me get this book into production. I recorded the narrative on the audiobook. So if you do buy the audiobook, it's going to be my voice reading my book, my words. And I did hire a producer, though, to help me massage the files and get them up to Amazon standards. So that audiobook is now going to be available on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. The book itself, I published not just a ebook or a paperback. I also have a hardbound. So you can order the hardbound book pretty much through any retailer. The ebook and the right now, the ebook and the paperback are only going to be available through Amazon. You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/book, and that's going to take you to Amazon. The Kindle edition, at least for the next few days, if you're listening to this as it comes out on December 6th, at least for the next couple days, the Amazon Kindle version is going to be available for 99 cents. And then it's going to go back up to its normal price of $6.99. Still a bargain for what I think you get for this book. But I want to give everybody that needs this book or wants this book, regardless of what your budget, if you can afford a $1 Kindle book, you can watch it on your computer because you can download their app, or you can do it on your phone with their app. So I know Kindle, even though it's a kind of an Amazon thing, you can still watch it and listen to it anywhere. And it's only 99 cents. So please do reach out there. And if you've gotten the book, or if you get the book, I would really appreciate a rating and a review on the book. This is hypercritical because Amazon shoppers do pay attention to those ratings. And if they come across a book and it's highly rated, or they come across a book that doesn't have any ratings, they're always going to opt for the one that had the ratings. There's not going to pay that much and spend that much time reading the description to understand if a book is for them. They're going to immediately hit the page. They're going to see the cover. They're going to see the number of ratings and whatever rating level they got. And then and only then, they might read the description and read some of the reviews. So please do take just a moment to leave me a rating and review. It really does help the book grow and become something special. So going forward, what's going on? I told you I got laid off, and you probably already knew that. But when I got laid off, I was thinking about how my work affected my life, affected my health. And I made the decision to opt for health and wellness over the job. I love what I'm doing here, so I decided to double down on pulling in some clients. I have the most wonderful clients in the world. I really do. I love each and every one of them. Every week when we have our calls, whether it be the one-on-one calls or the group calls, I leave those calls pumped because I know I'm making a difference, and I see my clients getting results, and we're having these great conversations about our health and our wellness. So it's been really, really cool to be able to ramp that up. And of course, I've continued the podcast with some sponsors, but more often than not without. So it's really not a sponsored podcast. It's all pretty much out of pocket and what I'm able to raise doing my clients. But what's come to be is that's just not sustainable for the long term. If I look at my cash flows relative to my outflows for the long period of time, I can't stay where I am. I can't or keep doing what I'm doing. Something has to change. So my wife and I have decided that we're going to move to Panama. And what that's going to mean is that my overall cost of living will be somewhat lower, which will help me spread the time, before I have to do something. And I'm going to continue to train clients. I'll be able to do that. I'm offering a special because I do need more clients. I'm just be frank about it. If I'm going to keep doing this, I've got to treat it like a business, and it is a business. So you can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group-training and use the coupon code podcast when you check out. That's going to allow you to get the first month for $1. So I want you to just try it out. There's a 40-day money-back guarantee, which basically says if you get in and spend your $1 and you came in and then you get billed for the next $75 for the first month, and you come in and say, no, I don't want to do this. This isn't working for me. I didn't see the results. Then I'll give you your money back. I won't ask any questions. I won't bother with it. I'll just say, okay, I get it. It just didn't work for you. This wasn't for you, and I'm sorry I let you down, but we're good. Here's your money back. So you get to try it for $1. It's like there's no risk to it. And I do believe that most people that are going to come in and give this a real shot and take me up on this $1 for the first month offer, you're going to see some results, and you're going to see what it's like to be part of a group that's all striving to be well together. You're going to have that support from me and from everyone else, as much as you need, as much as you want. So please do go check it out, 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group-training, and be sure to use the coupon code podcast at checkout. And then finally, I'm going to carry on doing the podcast. It's going to be a weekly show. Most of the episodes are going to be interview. They're the easier thing for me to do. They're the thing I enjoy. I'm getting paid pretty much to read books and interview people. Now, I say getting paid. I don't get paid. The podcast is absolutely free for you. But if you would like to support what I'm doing here at the podcast, you can become a Patreon. Patreon is a service that lets me take in monthly contributions to cover the overall cost of producing the podcast. Now, the podcast itself doesn't cost a whole lot. I mean, there's some hosting costs for the website. There's some hosting costs for the audio file. Those are not significant, but I also pay someone to put the transcripts together. And I also pay someone to do the audio processing, and that's where the dollars start actually kind of adding up. So this is a negative cash flow for me as a part of this, but I love doing this podcast. I'm going to probably keep doing the podcast, even if you don't become a Patreon. But if you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/Patreon, you can become a Patreon for as little as $1 a month. I have some levels in there that I'm willing to do a little bit extra for you if you're willing to help me out a little bit more. And some of those are going to be pretty cool, I think, if you really want to be a part of it. But you may not want to be a client, then don't be a client. Buy the book. If you may not want to buy the book because whatever you want to do. If you want to help the podcast, there's several ways now to do it. You can purchase the book, leave a rating and review. You can become a client. And better yet, I can help you personally reach your goals, or you can become a Patreon through 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/Patreon and help support the show so I can keep it going and keep doing this because, right now I'm sustainable because we're getting ready to move to Panama. That's my step is going to be lower stress, but it's also going to be, a change to my business and how I run things. So I'll have to just look at that. But I am going to keep doing the podcast. I am going to keep doing the training. And who knows, there might even be another book in my future. So another thing I want to do with the podcast going forward is I do want to make it more about you. And so I talked about how easy reading the books are for me to be able to put together a really good show. Another way that makes it really easy for me to do a good show is for me to answer your questions. If you put in some questions, it's very easy for me to sit down and put together the content that I want to have and how I want to outline it. That I can do really quickly. And so this is also a Q&A show. So with no further ado, I will go ahead and skip into the questions. Now, most of these questions came through the Facebook group. So if you're not a part of the group, you can go to Facebook.com. 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/group, and that'll take you to the group page. This is where you'll be able to ask those questions when we have these Q&A episodes. I want to have more of them, so I'll be putting them out there from time to time to see if I can build up enough questions to move forward. But most of these came from the group, so that if you want to get in touch, that's one of the best ways to do it. And so the first one comes from John, and John asks, what are your favorite mobility and balance routines? And this is a great question because balance and mobility are something that I'm much more focused on now than I ever have been in my training. And what I'll start this out with is, as a part of my overall philosophy of training is that you need to have a vision and you need to understand what you're trying to accomplish before you can actually start on the task. So my training for mobility and balance could be very, very different than yours, John. For example, I have very, very tight calves. And I don't know why they're as tight as they are. I never wore high heels. I hardly ever wore boots. But for one reason or another, my calves are very, very tight. So my mobility has to focus on my calves because my calves being tight adversely affects my movement pattern. If I want to improve my movement pattern, I have to address the tight muscles and I have to strengthen the weak muscles. So my tight muscles are my hip flexors and my calves, and my calves especially. My weak muscles tend to be my hamstrings and my quads. And so I do a lot of strengthening for my hamstrings and my quads, and I do a lot of stretching and mobility work on my hip flexors and my calves. And that helps my overall squat form to be much more clean and much better. Now, there are other areas in my body that are tight. My chest is a little tight, so I do stretches of the chest. My traps get a little tight from time to time, so I will occasionally do some self-myofascial release on my traps. Those are the areas that affect me. And so paying attention to your body and where you feel tight and where you know you lack strength, maybe the core, those are the areas where you want to focus on your general mobility. As for balance, Balance is an important aspect of day-to-day life. We could easily fall, and I can tell you, as we get older, the likelihood of falls goes through the roof, and the injuries and cause of death, as a fall is so high. It really is just unbelievable to me how many people over the age of 65 fall, and how many of them end up in the hospital or dead. And so this is not something you want to happen to you. So you do want to start a program to make sure that you're improving your balance. I recently interviewed a wonderful woman, and I am going to draw a blank on her name, other than I'm going to say her name is Claire. And Claire she's a balance person. And Carol Clemens, that's it. I'm sorry. It was Carol Clemens. That was episode 357 that just happened just this last Monday. So basically hers is Better Balance for Life. She has a pretty interesting program where you do most of your balance work as a part of your normal day-to-day routine. So perhaps while you're brushing your teeth, you stand on one foot with your eyes closed. It sounds like a simple task, but it's a lot harder than you would think it'd be. She just uses and builds it all into your day-to-day functional things that you're doing to use balance as a protocol. I say that's great. Just realize when you're training balance, you're trying to put yourself in a slightly imbalanced position, like standing on one foot or having 2 feet really close together. Make sure you're in a position where if you fall, you're not going to hurt yourself. That's the core thing I would say about balance. Now, to put it all together, the cool things about mobility and balance is that these are things that you can do every day. You can work on them every day. You don't have to, but the more you work on them, the easier it's going to be. The more your balance will improve, the more your mobility will improve. So it is something that I would encourage you to consider doing each and every day. And what I would say is make balance a part of your regular life, standing with your feet closer together, standing on one foot, putting yourself in unbalanced positions, moving side to side, getting yourself comfortable with out of the box movements. That's going to help your balance, and you can do that any day, anywhere. The second would be, as far as the mobility, just make that a part of your warm-up. Do a little cardio warm-up, get your body moving, and then spend a few minutes working on mobility on the areas where you have tightness. And that's going to be the best protocol I can give you. There's not any one protocol that's out there. I have run the Functional Fitness Challenge before, where I did give some general protocols that address what I feel are the movement patterns for most people, the balance issues for most people, but we all differ in our own ways. So there is no one size fits all for just about anything in health and fitness. So take that into account, but make it a part of your daily movement patterns, and you'll do a lot better. And daily activities like your workouts, and you'll do a lot better. Okay, the next one comes from Angie and Sammy, and I'm going to kind of combine their question because it was kind of the same question, but they were just asking it in a slightly different way. And the question was, how do I maintain endurance activity while in ketosis? Okay, ketosis basically means that your body becomes a fat burner, and it doesn't do that overnight. If you're moving from sugar burning, which most endurance athletes do, to fat burning, there's a bit of a curve there, a bit of a time where you're going to see a much lower performance rate. That's hard for a lot of endurance runners and cyclists and swimmers to kind of get through, because they really look at those PRs, they look at those times, and for them to see their performance drop, in many cases quite dramatically, is very, very hard for them. The answer to the question then is, how do you stick with it? Because you've got to outdo your brain and say, okay, I understand this is a momentary setback for a better position later. When I was in the Army, we came up on an enemy position. One of our stated goals, one of the things we would do fairly regularly, is do what we call a flanking maneuver, and that's where we would go back a bit, and then circle around to come in on the side. So we were catching them from two planes. This is kind of where I'm saying with this, is realize you are taking a couple steps back to be able to put yourself in a better, safer position. Once your body gets fat adapted, so we're going to talk about two different types of adaptation here. And different people like to use different words, but I'll just explain it this way. Initially, what you're trying to do is get your body to adapt to using body fat for fuel. So that's the fat adaptation. That's when you hear the things called like keto flu. I prefer to call it like carb withdrawals, because your body isn't getting the carbs it needs, and it's fighting you. It's just saying, okay, get some carbs, eat something. You're going to feel miserable if you don't eat anything. It's trying to figure out how to start burning its own fat, and eventually it will figure that out. During that fat adaptation period, it's important for you to make sure that you're getting adequate fat in your diet, which might mean that you're eating more overall calories than you did when you were a sugar burner. And that's, again, we're working toward performance, so that's cool. It's okay to do that for a while, and then you'll back off of that fat that you're eating when your body gets comfortable with fat and can actually start burning fat off your body. And you'll know that's happening when you start waking up in the morning and you're not hungry. And intermittent fasting almost becomes something natural to you because you're just not hungry that much. That's when you're starting to get that fat adaptation. And that takes up to a week. For most folks, it can be 2 or 3 days, but for some, it can be as long as a week. So you're going to go through that fat adaptation phase. Now, even as you go through that fat adaptation phase, you still might not see improvements in your overall performance. You might be slowly getting back to what you were doing, but you're not seeing any real improvements beyond just kind of seeming to catch up to where you were. So then we're going to talk about the process called keto adapted. Now, keto adapted is where when you're doing intense, long stuff, your body can shift over and is quick enough and good enough at burning body fat to keep fueling you. Most of us, we have about a teaspoon of sugar in all of our bloodstream, and then we have glycogen in our muscles and our liver. Now, that energy right there, of what you basically would start out with on a normal everyday run or anything, should be enough to keep you going for about 90 minutes with moderate intensity exercise. So if you're going for a run of less than 90 minutes, which most of us do, you should be fine. You might see a little less performance, but that's more probably just feeling like you just don't have the energy. It's like a fatigue thing. But in a general sense, you have enough glycogen and glucose in your system to be able to carry you that far. Now, you've probably heard about the marathon bonk, which happens somewhere around mile 16 to 18. And that's where now you've used up the glycogen, now you've used up your glucose, and you're starting to effectively bonk. Okay? Folks on keto don't bonk at that point. Most of them, if they're keto adapted, they just keep going because their body can adapt to turning the fat into glucose and glycogen and keep you going, and the ketones. So just recognize that if you're running less than 90 minutes, you probably aren't going to see a huge decrease in performance that doesn't come back really quick. Once you're fat adapted, you should be fine. Once you get past that, you want to start going further, then you're going to have to wait till you're keto adapted. And the keto adaptation can actually take a year or more. Some people will see it in as early as 3 or 4 months, but some folks have to train for about a year to really get their body efficient enough with using ketones to be able to keep up the performance. And those that do report back even better times, that their performance improves even beyond what they were capable of doing as a sugar burner. So I know that's a long answer, but I still have a few more things I want to go through as you get through this, because there are ways to kind of fuel around this. And the two of the ways that I like to talk to people about it is, the first one's exogenous ketones. So you can explore using exogenous ketones, which are basically ketones that you take by mouth to help fuel you while you're moving, particularly as you're getting close to the point where you would generally bonk, because you're not quite keto adapted. So you're going to go ahead and add in these ketones, esters usually, that are going to allow your body to start using those ketones efficiently to keep you going. So some people will do that. Others will revert back to some form of carbohydrate fueling, be that a starch, or they just decide, okay, I can take in a small amount of sugar while I'm doing the run. As long as I taper it and know what I'm doing, I won't end up taking myself generally out of ketosis because I know I'm burning more than I'm putting in. So you can do that kind of stuff with your fueling, as to say either you're going to add ketones or starches or some form of glucose, but a very limited amount, as a fueling strategy for your longer runs. Or you can try to carb load a little bit by just making sure that the small amount of carbohydrates that you do eat they kind of come on that front end. So you maybe you eat some carbohydrates for breakfast before a run, and then you can go into the run knowing that at least you've topped off your glycogen stores and your glucose, and your blood sugar's up a little bit because you just had some carbohydrates. But in any case, just realize that to get into deep ketosis and stay in ketosis and get all of the benefits that ketosis is going to give you, you are probably going to lose some performance for a while until you manage to get yourself all the way up to keto adapted. And anything you do as far as taking in glucose or starches, and that's very likely to slow down the keto adaptation phase. So if you can suck it up, particularly during an off season, and get yourself keto adapted, you're going to see a much better race season next year. Okay, next question comes from Trent. Is there a good way to know when to push through discomfort pain and when it's better to back off? The general rule of thumb is this. If you feel it in a joint, back off. Joints typically depict a tendon or ligament issue, and those take a good while to heal, and you don't want to flare those up. And I know you've probably felt this stuff like tendonitis and those types of things. You want to make sure if the pain is in a joint, then that's the time to kind of slow down and get that assessed. Spend some time away from it. The tendons and ligaments, because they don't get the blood flow that a muscle gets, they just take longer to heal. Now, as far as muscles are, in a general sense, if you're just getting general soreness, you're probably okay to just take your standard rest of anywhere from 24 to 48 hours of a normal rest phase before you go back to work. If you feel like the muscle's recovered at that point, then you should be able to push just as hard. If you feel like you've torn something or you have a pull, then I would take a little bit more time off. Most muscles generally can repair themselves easily within a week or two. If it's taking longer than that, then you may have done something more significant, and I would go see a doctor. But in a general sense, the general rule is if you feel it in the body of the muscle, it's probably okay to just rest it for a day or two and then go back at it. If you feel it in a joint, that's going to take a little bit more time, so I would take even more time off. And anything that has you feeling uncomfortable when you're not doing anything after 3 days, I'd definitely go get that checked out with the doctor. And then the final question comes from Marcia, and it is, as a mature woman, her words, not mine, what should I be concerned about, and what kind of exercise focus can I expect? And this again goes back similar to the question that I had with John and the mobility and balance. It really comes down to what you want to accomplish. What are the highlights in your life, the things that you want to be able to do 20, 30 years down the road? Do you want to be the grandma that can run 5Ks with your grandchildren? Do you want to be the person that is independent? So our visions are going to change over time. So the first thing I'd say is really establish a vision of what you want to feel like and be like 10, 15 years down the line. For most of us, that's going to involve some resistance training. And I say that in all earnesty because sarcopenia is a wasting of muscle. Osteopenia is a wasting of bone. And if we don't lift weights, not necessarily weights, but if we don't do resistance training, we're going to see a decline in our muscle mass and our bone density. So resistance training is very, very important for us to maintain good body composition and stay healthy. Additionally, our strength decreases for the same basic reason. If we're not doing resistance training, we will get weaker and weaker. And there's a point where that weakness then becomes an independence issue. And I say this in the book, if you have trouble sitting down and getting back up, that's a problem. But it becomes a huge, huge problem when it's the bathroom and you're taking a toilet break and you can't stand up. Now, you can have rails installed in your bathroom, and that's going to help somewhat, but that's not always going to be the case. Again, if you're not building the strength or maintaining the strength, eventually your arms and your legs won't be strong enough to stand you up. And then where are you? Well, you've lost your independence. Someone has to help you in and out of the bathroom, and that's not a pleasant place to be. So I would say resistance training is almost a must for every single one of us that can work out. If your doctor says you're clear to work out, then train. Definitely resistance training is for all of us. I would say for many of us, most of us probably, endurance training is going to be important because we want to keep going. If we're going with family and they want to go walk around the zoo or walk around the park, or you just want to run out and play with your dogs, you're going to need a little bit of stamina endurance to be able to keep up that activity level for any period of time. Otherwise, you're sitting on the bench watching. And I don't know anyone that enjoys sitting on the bench and watching as much as they enjoy doing. So, endurance exercise is going to be important. Next, on the order of, for most of us over the age of 40, I would look at mobility and balance. The falls I talked about earlier, very important if you have the strength and the bone density that you don't break something when you fall. But better yet, let's not fall. So let's work on our balance. And then our mobility is just, again, our ability to tie our own shoes and reach and do the things we need to do. If we don't have good mobility, our movement patterns are going to be bad and we risk injuring ourselves. There are a few other modalities out there that could be important. Agility, if you're walking through the grocery store parking lot and a careless driver doesn't see you and they start to back up at you, what's your ability and agility to be able to step out of the way of that car? And so all of these are generally important, but you have to preface which ones you're going to spend the most time on, because we can't do all of them all at the same time all the time. So we're going to have to focus on some from times. And this is when you can use periodization and say, well, I know the weather is going to be good this time of year, so I'll work on endurance in the spring and the summer. And then in the fall, I'll work on strength. And then in the winter, when it's really, really cold, I'll do a lot of mobility and balance work along with the strength work, the resistance training. So there's an opportunity for you to, make this seasonal, ebb and flow through it, do it as it makes sense, to keep the balance that's keeping you moving towards your vision. All right. So I hope you found this episode enjoyable. I really enjoy the fact that 3 years I've been providing this podcast, and we've had such a great time. We've had awesome guests, and obviously I have to thank you for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness Podcast. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Dr. Pat Luce and discuss his book, The 7-System Plan, Proven Steps to Lose Weight, Heal Chronic Illness, and Reverse Aging for Good. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.